With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoe's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. Welcome, Exploring More podcast listeners. So excited to be talking about this series on warfare. And SJ and I, this is number 3, right?
Yeah, third.
This is our third swing. We're not doing very well keeping it concise and tight.
We said it was going to be 3-part. I think it's probably going to be a 30-part if we keep going at this rate, which is fine.
It's probably important.
Probably important. It needs to be talked about. Not probably. It is.
I think you're going to find if you're a first-time listener, this is new to you, you'll see it. This vein is prominent for us.
Yeah, it runs through everything we talk about.
There is other ways to explore this with us other than this particular series. But when we have this topic like this, we get to kind of keep swinging back at it and coming back at it. And so I wanted to, as we started with the first podcast in this series about the larger story, and the context of our days is that of war and battle, and that there are spiritual forces at work against us, and there's spiritual forces at work for us.
Right.
And that is the larger gospel. That is not only important to hear, but you have to see it for yourself, right, Neo? Nobody has to be told.
Morpheus says to him, you know, you're seeing the world through your own eyes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Those even have to be worked on and renovated.
Right.
And he says it's the world pulled over your eyes. And so welcome to the new world. Welcome to the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to talk about some of these stories, actually, that we love. We talked about Lord of the Rings, The Matrix, Narnia, and evil. And we want to devote these next minutes to just the kingdom of darkness and dark angels and the demonic, to add a little exploration in what that's like, what that's about. SJ, let me go back to Matthew 28. We brought it up before. Jesus declares the resurrected Christ in the Great Commission. I think we often, and it's good that we often emphasize go and make disciples. Don't even get me started on how that's gone crazy. But go and make disciples, teaching them, and basically to do what I showed you, to live like I live, to live like you're learning how to live. And so, yeah, it's a good thing. That's the Great Commission. But in order to do that, Jesus says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Now I give it to you. Therefore, You just go back one phrase.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to shed light on. You're going to need power and authority. Why? Because there's things in this story.
There is evil there that does not sleep. Right?
And
Lord of the Rings.
You're going to have to exercise it.
Yeah.
And they're not going to give it up until they have to. And if the kingdom of darkness that is oppressing, stealing, killing, destroying.
Mm-hmm. The unholy trinity, Satan, the world, and the flesh.
Right.
Yeah.
So that force is literally what we're being deployed into with enough to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to need his power and authority. It's in the book of Acts that you really see, just like they did when they were with Jesus, they encountered the demonic.
No doubt.
I'm not talking about just mental disorders and physical problems that people had. There was this other realm even that Jesus worked in and gives us power and authority to work in. And this is really, really underachieving as a church, and almost across the board, not everywhere, but just almost across the board in the West anyway, untreated.
Oh, yeah. Unrecognized.
Right.
To a large part.
Right.
No
And
doubt.
so we want to talk about it for a few minutes. I'd recommend a book called Defeating Dark Angels by Kraft, K-R-A-F-T. And Dr. Kraft in Defeating Dark Angels really has taught us a lot about how this works. And he makes it really clear. He's not talking about, in believers' life, possession. He's talking about infection. He's talking about influence. He's talking about the demonic realm. One of the things the enemy's done is really kind of made this a fascinating horror film kind of thing. I mean, we're the generation where when The Exorcist came out,
Oh, I don't want to get any of that on me. Yeah.
yeah,
It's awful.
and
It's awful.
you think about back then in the 80s, some films like that, Damien. If you even look at Netflix now, or you look at trailers.com, or you go somewhere and you look at the amount.
Oh, if you just go to the movies.
Well,
Half the previews are.
and that's if you're at a movie that actually supports those previews. You know, family film, they're not going to show that much. But when you start to see how much of that's produced, my point is, we made a point in the first podcast on this series that the relationship between the physical realm and spiritual realm.
Yeah.
This is an incredible opportunity to see it. Do you know how many of these films are being produced?
Yep.
I mean, it's 4 out of 10, maybe 3, but almost 4 out of 10 films are dark, demonic.
Yep. Have to do something with evil.
Yes, there's sinister stuff.
Yeah, but this isn't Alfred. This isn't Alfred Hitchcock. This is
No, what's living in the walls.
darkness. What's coming to you in your dreams.
Yeah.
That sort of
What's
thing.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
It's an amazing amount of
Yeah.
material graphically. And my point is, there is a fascination with this within our culture, but there's not the fascination with this within our Christian culture.
Right.
I get it. Let's just stay away from those films, but it's not to stay away from this part of the battle that we're actually given. When you go back to the book of Acts, like I was starting, we're given power and authority to exercise our options in the kingdom against the rulers of this dark world, principalities, spiritual forces that are affecting people, and in some cases actually infecting them. So the false self we talked about last week is working. Well, there's some minions, there's some
support
creatures,
staff.
there's support staff,
Yeah.
there's management
They are.
that is working. In addition to Kraft's book about demonic spirits, foul spirits, C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Screwtape Letters.
Oh, man.
One of the most helpful exposures to the spiritual realm and how it works, what they're doing to their subject. They call it
The bureaucracy that's going
Yes.
on in the background.
yes.
Yeah, it's really interesting. They actually, in the late 80s, I think, created a graphic novel based on Screwtape Letters. So it's all the same text from the book, but it's illustrated in front of you.
Robin and I went
really interesting.
a couple years ago to, there's a gentleman who goes around and performs.
Oh, I remember when you went to that.
In the theater.
Yeah.
And he does a one-man show as Screwtape, reading these briefings and
So
a little bit
there's
the theatrical, but it's very, very well done.
Yeah,
Incredible.
there's creations here, books, movies, one-man stage shows that kind of reflect and kind of show what's going on from the side of the kingdom of darkness
right.
in the spiritual
Right.
realm. You got to be really careful about how far you delve into that. I remember C.S. Lewis talking about after writing that book, he would never want to write that book again and really didn't want to do it in the first place, but was compelled to do it
Yeah.
because it's just it's so dark. And when you get close to those things, even if you're on an intel mission, you got to be really careful.
Yeah.
I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And so to that point, you have to remind them, the dark forces, the spirits, the fallen angels, you actually have to enforce and you have to remind them who you are and by what authority you're operating in.
Yep, no doubt.
And as we've experienced this with people, and as we've experienced some of the training through Dr. Kraft, defeating dark angels, it feels like that. You're enforcing what's true, and you're there. You think of the park rangers.
Yeah.
You know, there's a reality show now for everything.
Is there one for park
There
rangers?
is.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
And what they do is they patrol,
Yeah.
and they're looking for smoke, looking for smells. They're listening for things. And there's reports of invaders, squatters, people who are just trying to get off the grid to people who don't want to be found.
Right, who are hiding.
This is the traffic that we're talking about. And they then have to go in, and most of the time armed. they're not without their hand on their weapon.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
They don't know what's going on there.
And just because you're in a state park doesn't mean it's not dangerous.
Right.
There's a threat there potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just bring that up to say, when you get to the book of Acts, you start to see the disciples running offense, moving, and doing what Jesus did and taking care of business.
I'm chuckling because I'm remembering them being like almost incredulous. It's true. We did it.
Yeah. So there's that scrimmage, right? When Jesus gives them the power, sends them out in pairs, and they come back. We did this.
It actually works.
This was awesome. And what does Jesus say? I saw Satan fall like lightning. I mean, even Jesus is saying, they didn't even hear that.
Right.
They're still high-fiving, saying, yeah, we did too. You wouldn't believe. And
I scored a touchdown.
This one kid who was writhing and foaming. And I mean, again, we associate, and I brought that up, probably shouldn't have, but we associate the activity of the demonic with that kind of behavior. And I want to just be on record, SJ, that warfare has changed over the centuries in the physical realm.
Yeah.
And what did we say earlier in the podcast? The relationship between what's going on in the spiritual realm plays out in the physical realm. I mean, now drones,
cyber warfare.
We used to march out of the bushes
in rows and
take
shoot at
turns
each other.
shooting each other. Now warfare is so different.
Yep.
And you wore the right uniform so you could be identified. That's not happening anymore in the spiritual realm. It is covert. So in the Matrix, great example again, when Morpheus is training Neo, he takes him into the training module. Do you remember with the red dress, the woman?
Oh, yeah.
The red dress. But that module, he's explaining how this works, how agents
can be anybody.
Infiltrate the Matrix and can be anybody and nobody. He then explains to him, you're going to have to learn how this works so that you can do what nobody else has done.
I love that moment when he says, were you listening to me, Neo, or were you looking at the woman in the red dress? And then he says, look again. And there's a gun in his face.
Yeah.
That's how the spiritual realm, the kingdom of darkness, works.
Yeah. Well, let's take a break, and then we'll come back with the second half of this podcast, share a little experience, and encourage our friends.
Hey, podcast listeners, it's SJ again. Just wanted to make sure you all know about two major events we have coming up soon. We don't want you to miss out on the chance to sign up and experience a weekend that just might change the trajectory of your life. The first one I want to talk to you about briefly is the Heart of a Warrior Allies Advance. During the weekend, we'll explore the masculine journey and the glory of your life, how you uniquely bear God's image, and the redemptive friendships available when a man meets allies and brothers who will fight beside him for freedom. The format of the weekend includes small group dimension and conversations while continuing to offer critical moments of time alone with God. We hope you'll get away and hear God's voice, pursue more healing, more restoration, and invite the Father to validate and initiate you as a beloved son, a warrior heart, and a good king. The Zoe Heart of a Warrior Allies Advance is coming up at March 19th through the 22nd at the Young Life Rockbridge Camp in Goshen, Virginia. And the Advance Weekend is designed for Heart of a Warrior Encounter alumni. And that's the next event I want to talk to you about is the Heart of a Warrior Encounter. And during this weekend, we have three main objectives: help a man get his heart back, teach him how to fight, and show him where the battles are. To see Christ come for a man's heart and what God is up to in validating a man, initiating him and calling him into the larger story is truly a glorious thing. It's a fierce journey for every man, but one that needs to be taken. So I would invite you to join the squadrons of men who are hungry and thirsty for more. The kingdom needs more men who know what it is to walk deeply with God. Come join us April 30th through May 3rd at the Heart of a Warrior Encounter Weekend. Again, at Camp Rockbridge in Goshen, Virginia. Come join us and be one of the men who is seeking and finding more. And there is more. For more details and further information, visit zoe.org/events. And I hope to see you there.
All right, welcome back, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast, Defeating Dark Angels, Demons, and the Kingdom of Darkness, and how this works. So when we're with somebody things aren't quite aligning. They're not being as free as
Yeah,
they
I
want.
think the most recent one, a guy had been to the Encounter Weekend 4 or 5 times, and he
Right.
was still stuck.
On something. Yep.
Yeah.
So he's gotten some healing. So we had him come in and we just spent, a good 4 hours with him. Some of it was to hear his story and then to go after healing, which is breaking the vows and the agreements, because that's, according to Dr. Kraft and our experience, that's what the enemy preys upon. I love in the opening
they
of that
feed
book,
on that.
he calls them rats and roaches.
Yep.
That's a great image. The other
Nibbling
great
at
image
you
I
in the
have,
dark.
hyenas,
Yep.
scavengers.
Right.
I mean, even hyenas laugh. I mean, poor animal. They look like darkness. They
look nuts.
They
is
move.
what they
They
look
move
like.
that.
Yeah,
They move that way. So anyway, back to this friend of ours came in, and so we said, let's explore this. Let's see if there's any demonic activity, anything moving. And before we did that, we needed to take out the trash.
Mm-hmm.
We needed to go after anything that they had access to, anything that they had authority over. So if you break contracts with the enemy, then they can't enforce them.
Right.
That's the whole,
The
that's the
agreements that
idea of
you've
how
signed,
this works. Yes. So
have to be
breaking
broken.
agreements, breaking vows, giving attention to the wounds, anything that's operational, that's what we mean by the trash in this. And so we spent a couple hours doing that. Those are huge steps towards freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus talks about how demons and darkness work, and he's teaching, and he says basically this, that when a spirit leaves, when a dark spirit is commanded to leave, it goes out into these arid places, and it says, hey, I need to go back and see how my old house.
And check up on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See if it's safe to come back, or if the lights are on and there's anything occupying the place that I used to. So they come back with 7 friends. They get a little posse, a little war party. Jesus is telling this story, right? And he brings the light that they come back with friends. And if the true self that's occupying that space now does not defend the keep, it does not
Prepare itself for the return.
enforce the power and authority that's given to him, Jesus says they come in, they take claim again, and it's better for that man if the first one hadn't left.
Had never left, because now there's
7, and it's worse. I mean, if you want a nutshell on addiction,
that's a relapse.
And why it's so hard,
Yep.
it's because there's a fight coming. They're not going to give up territory easily. They will eventually, but there has to be a will and a resolve on our part.
Strategically too, what we have found is that, when it's the one, he gives it up pretty easily to make you think.
Especially if you've taken care of the vows and the agreements
That's
and
right.
the contracts that gave him authority to be there in the
But
first place.
it's a strategic move for him to just leave, because, as Jesus said, okay, now I'm going to leave for a little while and wait until you maybe become complacent and come back with my posse. That's a tactic.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah. It's not if they come back, or it's not if they come calling.
Or try.
And today is a much better representation for you and me than it was when we were kids. I mean, the doorbell rang, right? And you ran over your brother to see if you could open it to get it. Or he. And
we didn't lock the door.
It was a fight to get to the door. The phone rang, and it was a run. I mean, I'll get it. And we ran.
Yeah.
That's not that way anymore. That's what I'm talking about. The evolution of this. The warfare is different.
Yep.
Dark forces have gone covert. They can't just openly abuse people, even though I would say they do more than we admit. We're willing to admit.
Don't we hear about those stories when people go on mission trip to other countries?
Yeah.
I mean, when
and they encounter it more openly.
It's more open. Yes.
Yeah. It's such a big conversation, one that we may have to hit again in some more detail. What I'm trying to make and bring into the light, SJ, is that these dark spirits, the demonic spirits, the fallen angels, they actually have a role and a part in this.
Yes, they're operating
in this ecosystem at this point.
And to reiterate something you said earlier, they don't get credit for everything that's going on.
Yeah.
We're not saying every single struggle that you're experiencing or your false self, and you can't attribute everything that is not of God to these demons.
Every inconvenience, every unfortunate.
They're not that pervasive. However, they're around.
Yeah.
They are there, no doubt.
If you're living with kind of a I don't see it at all, you probably ought to swing to they're everywhere.
At least initially.
So you can swing back to
Yeah,
Okay.
be hyper vigilant for a
Yes,
while.
Yes, yes. And that's what I was saying about the doorbell.
Right.
It rings now. Who is that? What happened?
Yeah. Who wants to sell me what?
Same thing with a cell phone.
Mhm.
If there's a number on there that is not, I'm just confessing to everybody who's listening. If it just comes up as a number and not a name, they're going to voicemail.
Yeah, I've got it set on my phone now. It doesn't even ring. If a number that's not my contact
I like
list.
that. I need that feature.
Okay, I'll help you with
this,
it.
this is the point that we ought not trust in any way, shape, or form that we live in a safe environment. That's not true, and we should not live that way. That the enemy is looking, prowling around, 1
Yeah.
Peter 5, looking for someone to devour, looking for an agreement, trying to get a lie slithered through into the garden so that it can occupy some place
Yeah.
and establish itself. And they're not going to just stay there. They're going to call in reinforcements. So it's never just one. We've found this over and over again. It's not one. They actually travel in groups. They actually have little identifications with one another. I was just talking this through with a friend in the last 24 hours. And the accusation that they've lived under isn't true. Okay, let me say it this way. It isn't true, but it wasn't even done. It was that false. It was a conclusion. For example, their father worked a lot, didn't make a lot of money, but was gone working a lot for provision. Well, the enemy whispered to them, he doesn't love you.
Wow. And that just became true over the years.
How powerful
Mm-hmm.
can lies be?
Mm-hmm.
For an 8-year-old or 9-year-old who's now 28 or 38 or 48 to come up with that,
Right.
where are you and who told you that?
Right. Who's speaking to you?
And the voices of the enemy, they're looking. They're walking around with clipboards. And when you open the door and you sign it, they invade. So you get rid of the contracts first. You unsubscribe. You get the healing from those moments
Right.
of wounding.
Yep.
And then you have to go after them. The
Yeah.
house has to be treated. It's Terminex, right? It's pest control.
Carpet bomb.
But these are unruly spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And there are ways that they get treated.
Yeah, I remember from the time we've done it a couple of times now, worked with someone trying to dislodge some of these spirits. And they will tell you falsehoods, even when you command them in the name of Jesus to
Yeah,
tell
the truth.
the truth and what their name is.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anybody that you're working for? Well, no, I'm the top guy, and a couple of times it's been, no, there's actually 2-3 layers beyond that. I mean, they are very unruly and crafty in the way that they try to deceive.
Yeah.
The other thing that occurs to me is you said that they will invade. And, when you're an 8-year-old and the agreement comes along that you say, my dad doesn't love me, that's a foothold. And when you're planning on an invasion, you start with a foothold and then it becomes a stronghold. And then you're the invading force that you take over
And
the
you
land.
said it in an earlier podcast, they'll give you just enough air
Mm-hmm.
that you haven't drowned,
Mm-hmm.
but they are drowning
Mm-hmm.
you in their lies, accusations, and all the things that they're spinning,
Mm-hmm.
curses.
Making you weaker and weaker
Yeah.
till eventually you can't surface.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, friends, allies, the good thing is this is not scary stuff. This is important stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to start, in session 1 with there's this larger story going on. And then in you're a large story. In session number 2, that there's a
self.
conflict that's going on within. And then down into this micro vantage point and in that false self, there are forces at work, managers, the help that you break these agreements. Many of them get taken care of, but there's some that have authority even within your family tree. Why do you think?
Generationally,
Yeah.
yeah.
So let's end with this. Why
Yeah.
do you think there's alcoholism in my family, and therefore I'm more susceptible? Well, yeah, That's not a medical profession.
Uh-huh.
They're observing the reality of the spiritual realm profession.
Yep. I've got a temper just like my daddy did, and that's just the way I am. By the way, I meant to say that during the false self-talk. You know, if there's an area of your life where you say, that's just the way I am, that's a great flare being shot up that that's your false self.
False self moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But any of those things, just like my dad, just like my grandpa, just like my mom, just like my brother, I mean, think about that
It's
for a
not
second.
everybody, SJ, it's not everybody we encounter, but how many guys have we talked to who are struggling with pornography or struggling with something in the sexual, and it was their dad who introduced them to it. And it was their grandpa who had a few affairs, and it's kind of so obvious that it sometimes is overlooked
Right.
that there's actually a foul spirit at work. I mean, if the spirit of death is operating, when they tell us about suicidal thoughts, we get into their story, then we start to kind of cross-examine this because it's really a legal proceeding. Honestly, that's how
It is like a
understand it.
courtroom.
You want to see the evidence, what's going on, what's in the story, and they're suffering from darkness, death, feeling suicidal thoughts. Okay, well, you're a Christian. They know, you and I know that the true self doesn't think like that. So something's not right.
Mm-hmm.
So when we start talking about why do they think they can do that? Why do they think they can whisper that? This isn't something they did wrong.
What makes them think they have the authority to speak to you that way?
Well, my great uncle, he committed suicide, and you start to follow this family line and you're like, all right, there's a spirit of death.
Yeah, we followed it one guy back into Europe and
he didn't.
3 generations, 4 generations
I remember that
back.
one. It was the foul spirit telling us
about it.
I know. It was fun, wild,
crazy,
amazing,
awesome,
and weird.
all at the same time.
But all of that to say, Charles Kraft, Defeating Dark Angels, if you want to know more and want to explore more, I love that the first 8 or 9 chapters of that book are really about inner healing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the last 4 or 5 that are about, okay, now let's talk about addressing dark spirits.
Yeah, I love that too, because like we've said, it's not all attributable to them.
No, we don't go walking around flashing our badges and poking people with demonization. This is not demon possession. This is demonization. And that's literally in the Greek, in the translation.
Yeah.
Our scriptures aren't really even translated as helpful to this conversation with that word of possession versus demonization. That's a whole other subject that I'll leave to Dr. Kraft because he spends quite a bit of time looking at that. Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to explore with us warfare.
Yeah.
And there's so much more. Heart of a warrior, we need warriors because we're in a war.
Right.
We need peacekeepers because we're in a war. We need men and women who know how to be entrusted with power and authority and can wield it in the spiritual realm. And that first, right, SJ, it first is taking care of your house, taking care of your heart, getting your heart in mind. There's training in your own healing so that you can then be deployed into the healing and training of others.
A house divided against itself cannot stand, right?
Amen.
So when you are divided between your true self and your false self, there's going to be trouble. And we don't have it all figured out yet, but we are on that journey. There's still more to uncover. We're uncovering more and more of our false self so that we can get rid of it.
Learning how to listen to the voice of God, learning how to walk with God, learning how to receive love as beloved sons, and learning how to fight.
So in 3, 25 or 30-minute podcasts, we've tried to talk about spiritual warfare, and obviously we haven't been able to cover everything. We may do 1 or 2 more episodes about it. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear your questions.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear from you. Exploring more at zoe.org is our email address. And if we've said something and you were like, what does that even mean? We'd love to address those questions.
And if you really want to explore this more, we've got a men's event, men's weekend coming up the end of April 30th through May 3rd at Rockbridge Young Life Camp in Goshen, Virginia, just near Lexington, Virginia. And 450 guys coming from around the country and around the world for this kind of training.
You're with 400 some odd guys, but you're one-on-one with God. That's why we call it an encounter.
It's a weekend away with God. So you can go to the Zoe website, zoe.org, and zoweh.org, and you can hit events and you'll see information and stuff there. And there's some other free resources and things like that that you can just go to the Outpost on the online store, hit free, and boom, you'll see all kinds of things you can have access to in this topic, in this very topic.
That's right.
So, hey, thanks for listening, and we look forward to being with you again soon on Exploring More podcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoe.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoe on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoe on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.